July 7, 1944. Tanapag Plain, northern Saipan, Marana Islands. The pencil scratched across the damp paper as Marine Artillery Observer Corporal James Whelan recorded coordinates that would save thousands of American lives in the next 15 hours. Grid 164-223. Estimated 4,000 plus approaching. Request all available batteries. This is not a probe. Through his field glasses, he watched something that shouldn't exist in modern warfare. Thousands of Japanese soldiers forming for a human wave attack in the age of automatic weapons and coordinated artillery. The pre-dawn darkness revealed bayonets fixed, officers with raised swords, and behind them walking wounded with bandages wrapped around their heads. Some carried on stretchers, all moving forward in what would become the largest Banzai charge of the Pacific War. 23 miles of American artillery tubes, 105mm howitzers, 155mm long toms, 81mm mortars, and naval guns from ships offshore swung toward grid 164 to 223. What the Japanese didn't know was that they were charging into the most sophisticated fire control system ever deployed in combat. A system that could put more explosive power on a single map grid in 60 seconds than entire armies possessed in World War I. The mathematics of modern warfare were about to be written in a language the Imperial Japanese Army had refused to learn. The precise, devastating calculus of time-on-target fire missions, manually set time fuses, and integrated fire direction centers that could orchestrate death from dozens of batteries as easily as a conductor leads a symphony. The Japanese military doctrine of Gyokusai, shattering like a jewel, had evolved from tactical maneuver to strategic delusion. By 1944, what began as shock tactics in China against poorly equipped forces had calcified into religious doctrine against an enemy that had industrialized warfare beyond Japanese comprehension. The first warnings had come at Guadalcanal in August 1942. The Ichiki Detachment, 917 men of the 28th Infantry Regiment, had charged Marine positions along what the Americans called Alligator Creek. The Marines, supported by pre-registered artillery from the 11th Marines Regiment, killed over 800 Japanese soldiers in a single night. The few survivors reported something unprecedented. American shells arrived simultaneously from multiple directions, creating a wall of steel that no amount of courage could penetrate. By Tarawa in November 1943, the Americans had refined their system. Fire Direction Centers, FDCs, now used improved radio communications and standardized procedures that could mass fires from multiple battalions in under 2 minutes. The Japanese charges that had succeeded through psychological impact in China were being systematically destroyed by mathematical precision. The disparity between American and Japanese artillery doctrine represented more than just technological difference. It was a chasm between industrial might and warrior mythology. While Japanese artillery still relied on direct observation and individual battery fire, the Americans had created an integrated system that would have seemed like science fiction to military theorists just a decade earlier. The American Fire Direction Center, perfected by 1944, was a marvel of applied mathematics. Artillery officers used graphical firing tables, slide rules, and plotting boards to calculate firing solutions that accounted for air temperature, wind speed, barrel wear, powder temperature, and the rotation of the earth. A trained FDC crew could compute a fire mission for multiple batteries in under 60 seconds. Major David Little, commander of the 3rd Battalion, 10th Marines on Saipan, described the system in official reports. We had forward observers with every infantry company connected by radio and wire to our FDC. When they called for fire, we plotted the target on our firing chart, calculated the data for each battery based on their position, and transmitted firing commands. Within 90 seconds of the call, rounds were in the air from multiple batteries, all timed to impact simultaneously. The Japanese had nothing comparable. Their artillery doctrine, based on French World War I methods, emphasized direct fire and individual battery action. Communication relied on runners and signal flags. Their forward observers, when they existed at all, had no radios. A Japanese artillery battery might take 15 minutes to engage a target that American gunners could hit in 90 seconds. By July 6, 1944, the Japanese situation on Saipan was hopeless. Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito's forces had been pushed into a pocket in northern Saipan, compressed into an area barely 3 miles wide. Of the original 32,000 Japanese soldiers and sailors on the island, fewer than 5,000 remained combat. Effective American forces, the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions and the 27th Infantry Division, had them surrounded on 3 sides with the ocean at their backs. In his final order, discovered on his body after the battle, General Saito wrote, "Whether we attack or whether we stay where we are, there is only death. However, in death, there is life. We must utilize this opportunity to exalt true Japanese manhood. I will advance with those who remain to deliver another blow to the American devils." The Japanese spent July 6th preparing for Gyokusai. Every able-bodied soldier, sailor, and marine was organized into assault units. The walking wounded were placed in follow-up waves. Civilian Japanese, including women and teenagers, were given bamboo spears and told to follow the soldiers. Those too wounded to walk were given grenades and told to wait for American troops to pass, then detonate themselves. The Americans knew something was coming. Intelligence officer Major James Cogswell had intercepted fragmentary Japanese communications, suggesting a final attack. More tellingly, Japanese artillery had gone silent, suggesting they were saving ammunition for a final barrage. Forward observers reported unusual movement in Japanese lines after dark. Lieutenant Colonel Justice Chambers, commanding 3rd Battalion, 25th Marines, positioned his men carefully that evening, as recorded in his after-action report. "I put my strongest companies on the likely avenues of approach and made sure every FO had backup communications. I told the artillery liaison officer to have every battery on the island ready. We all felt it. Tonight would be different. What the Japanese didn't know as they formed up in the darkness was that they were walking into the most sophisticated killing system ever devised. The American artillery on Saipan represented overwhelming firepower organized with scientific precision. The artillery available included 4 Marine artillery battalions with 105mm howitzers, 48 guns, 2 Marine artillery battalions with 155mm howitzers, 24 guns, 3 Army artillery battalions with 105mm howitzers, 36 guns, 1 Army artillery battalion with 155mm guns, 12 guns, dozens of 81mm mortars, organic to infantry battalions, and naval gunfire support from 6 battleships and 8 cruisers offshore. Total, over 150 artillery tubes, not counting mortars and naval guns. These batteries were connected by redundant communication systems, primary radio nets, backup wire lines, and emergency runners. Every infantry battalion had trained forward observers. Every battery had surveyed its position to within inches. Every gun had registered on pre-planned targets. The entire system could mass fire on a single target or engage multiple targets simultaneously. Colonel Louis Meza, commanding the 10th Marine Artillery Regiment, had spent 3 weeks perfecting the fire plan. His operations officer, Major Thomas Warham, had divided the island into numbered squares on a master grid map. Each battery had pre-calculated firing data for every square in their sector. When a forward observer called for fire on grid 164-223, every battery already knew the range and deflection. At exactly 0445 hours, July 7th, 1944, approximately 4,000 Japanese soldiers and armed civilians began moving forward. The National World War II Museum's detailed account, based on official Marine Corps records, confirms this as the largest Banzai charge of the Pacific War. Leading elements included remnants of the 136th Infantry Regiment, 43rd Division, naval personnel from the destroyed Saipan naval base, and aviation mechanics who barely knew how to use rifles. The wounded hobbled forward on crutches, determined to die with honor. The Japanese moved through the Tanapag Plain Valley toward a 500-yard gap between the 1st and 2nd Battalions, 105th Infantry Regiment, 27th Infantry Division. As they advanced, they began their battle cries, "Banzai! Banzai! Banzai!" The sound of thousands of voices echoing off the valley walls created an otherworldly effect that chilled even veteran Marines. Corporal Whelan, hidden in his observation post on a ridge overlooking the valley, was already on his radio. Fire Mission Grid 164-223. Enemy infantry in the open. Estimated regiment strength moving south. Request immediate suppression. The response came within seconds from the 10th Marines Fire Direction Center. Roger. Grid 164-223. Time on target. All available batteries. Splash in 90 seconds. What happened next was the product of 2 years of American refinement in the art of coordinated fires. Within the Fire Direction Center, a choreographed dance of calculation began. The target grid was plotted on the master chart. Distance and direction from each battery were measured. With precision instruments, corrections for weather conditions were applied. Time on target missions were the pinnacle of artillery coordination. Instead of batteries firing when ready, creating a rolling barrage that gave enemies time to take cover, every battery calculated when to fire so their shells would arrive at exactly the same moment. Batteries farther away fired first. Those closer fired later. The result was that dozens or even hundreds of shells would suddenly materialize out of the sky simultaneously, giving no warning. At exactly 4:47, the sky above the advancing Japanese erupted. The official Marine Corps history records that the initial barrage included shells from 12 artillery battalions, plus naval gunfire support. The effect on the densely packed Japanese formation was catastrophic. Official records indicate that the 105th Infantry supporting artillery fired over 2,600 rounds in the first hour alone. The manually set time fuses, though requiring more skill than later proximity fuses, proved devastatingly effective when properly employed. Artillery crews had spent days perfecting their fuse-cutting techniques, some reducing the process to mere seconds. The Japanese kept coming. This was the essence of Banzai, to continue despite impossible odds. The survivors picked their way through the bodies of their comrades, still screaming, "Banzai" and "Totsugeki," charge. Corporal Whelan continued calling in adjustments. Drop 200, left 100. Enemy infantry continuing advance. Request, repeat. What distinguished American artillery in 1944 from all previous wars was the ability to maintain continuous adjusted fire while enemy forces moved. Forward observers didn't just call in a barrage and hope. They watched the fall of shot, called in corrections, and walked the fire through enemy formations. The fire direction centers had developed a system called ladder fire, specifically for Banzai charges. As the Japanese advanced, the artillery would fire a line of shells across their front, then systematically walk the barrage backward through their ranks, then forward again, then backward, like a giant scythe cutting wheat. By 0530, the main Japanese charge had advanced only 400 yards at devastating cost. Bodies carpeted the valley floor. The wounded crawled over the dead, still trying to advance. Some groups took cover in ravines and defiles, only to have forward observers call in airbursts that turned these positions into death traps. As devastating as the artillery was, some Japanese soldiers inevitably pushed through. By 0600, scattered groups had reached the main defence line. The 105th Infantry Regiment bore the brunt of the assault. The two forward battalions would suffer 406 killed and 512 wounded, nearly 80% casualties. According to National World War II Museum records, this was where the American integration of direct and indirect fire support showed its full potential. Every Marine Rifle Company had 60mm mortars organic to its weapons platoon. Every battalion had 81mm mortars. These could engage targets too close for artillery, the danger close range, where friendly fire became a risk. At 0615, the largest remaining group of Japanese soldiers, approximately 600 men, penetrated the American line and overran artillery positions of the 3rd Battalion, 10th Marines. The artillery crews removed firing locks from their howitzers and fought as infantry. Some batteries depressed their gun barrels and fired point-blank into the charging Japanese, using ricochet fire to bounce shells off the ground. As the battle raged, the Navy added its weight to the slaughter. The battleship USS Tennessee and the cruiser USS Louisville had been stationed offshore specifically to support the defense against night attacks. Their 14-inch and 8-inch guns could fire star shells for illumination and high-explosive rounds for destruction. Fire control parties ashore could communicate directly with naval gunfire liaison aboard the ships. When Japanese reserves were spotted forming for a second wave, the call went out. Naval gunfire requested Grid 159-215, troops in open. Official naval records show that USS Tennessee alone fired 293 rounds of 14-inch ammunition during the engagement, while USS Louisville contributed 322 rounds of 8-inch shells. By 7:30, the Banzai charge had degenerated into isolated groups of Japanese soldiers trying to find any way through the American lines. The carefully planned human wave attack had been shattered by coordinated firepower. Small groups of 5 to 20 soldiers would periodically emerge from cover, scream, "Banzai!" and charge the nearest American position. The American artillery had shifted to harassing and interdiction fire, random barrages on likely assembly areas and routes of movement too. Prevent the Japanese from reorganizing. Every few minutes, a valley or ravine would erupt in explosions as artillery denied the enemy any safe ground. The most tragic phase began around 900 when Japanese wounded who couldn't walk began their own desperate actions. According to multiple eyewitness accounts documented in official histories, men with one leg hopped forward on crutches holding grenades. Soldiers with severe wounds crawled toward American lines, pushing rifles ahead of them. The chaos of the Banzai charge produced 3 Medal of Honor recipients whose actions are thoroughly documented in official citations. Lieutenant Colonel William J. O'Brien, commanding the 1st Battalion, 105th Infantry, refused evacuation despite wounds. When Japanese forces overran his command post, he mounted a jeep-mounted .50 caliber machine gun under fire to direct it against the enemy. After expending all ammunition, he fought with 2 pistols until killed. His body was found surrounded by at least 30 dead Japanese soldiers. His Medal of Honor citation, signed by President Truman on May 27, 1945, details his conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity. Private Thomas A. Baker, Company A, 105th Infantry, destroyed a Japanese strongpoint with a bazooka, then fought off multiple attacks, personally killing at least 24 enemy soldiers. Severely wounded and unable to walk, he refused evacuation. His famous last words to his comrades were, "Get the hell away from me." When his position was recaptured, Baker was found dead, propped against a tree with an empty .45 pistol in his hand, and 8 dead Japanese soldiers around him. Medal of Honor awarded posthumously May 9, 1945. Captain Benjamin L. Salomon, serving as battalion surgeon for the 2nd Battalion, 105th Infantry, was treating wounded when Japanese soldiers entered his aid station. He killed 4 with his rifle, then ordered the wounded evacuated while he covered their withdrawal with a machine gun. His body was found slumped over the weapon with 98 dead Japanese soldiers in front of his position. He had suffered 76 bullet wounds and 24 bayonet wounds. Due to Geneva Convention questions about medical personnel bearing arms, his Medal of Honor wasn't approved until May 1, 2002. As full daylight came to Saipan at 1000 hours, the full extent of the slaughter became visible. Official body count teams would eventually document 4,311 Japanese dead from the charge. American casualties totaled approximately 1,000 killed and wounded, with the 105th Infantry Regiment essentially destroyed as a fighting unit. The mathematics were stark. The American artillery had fired approximately 12,000 rounds during the 15-hour battle. The fire direction centres had coordinated fires from 18 separate artillery battalions, plus naval gunfire support. The system had functioned exactly as designed. Lieutenant Colonel Lewis Walt, observing the aftermath, wrote in his official report, "The enemy attacked with great courage, but without modern tactical sense. Our fire support system functioned exactly as designed. The forward observers performed magnificently. The fire direction centres never missed a beat." As the sun climbed higher, American graves registration teams began the grim work of collecting bodies. The scale of death was unprecedented in the Pacific War. Major Edward McCarthy, commanding the 2nd Battalion, 105th Infantry, one of the units that bore the brunt of the attack, described it in his after-action report as looking like a cattle stampede from a Western movie, except the Japanese just kept on coming. Among the American lines, the psychological impact was profound. Many Marines and soldiers had witnessed death before, but nothing on this scale. The systematic destruction of thousands of human beings, no matter how necessary, left deep impressions. Captain Edmund G. Love, the 27th Division historian, who would later write extensively about the battle, interviewed survivors immediately after the action. His notes, preserved in the National Archives, capture the raw emotions. Men who had been through everything were shaken. Not by fear. The Japanese never really had a chance, but by the sheer scale of the killing. The Japanese survivors melted back into caves in northern Saipan. Among them was Captain Sakae Oba, who would lead guerrilla resistance for another 16 months before finally surrendering in December 1945, 3 months after Japan's capitulation. His survival and continued resistance are thoroughly documented in military records, and the book Oba, The Last Samurai, Saipan, 1944-45. General Saito, who had ordered the charge, committed seppuku on July 10, 1944, 3 days after the failed assault. Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, former commander of the Pearl Harbor attack force, had already taken his own life on July 6th, the day before the charge. Their deaths marked the end of Japanese organized resistance on Saipan. The Battle of Saipan's Banzai charge showcased revolutionary developments in military technology and doctrine. The Fire Direction Center system, developed at Fort Sill in the 1930s, had transformed artillery from an art to a science. Instead of individual battery commanders making gut decisions, trained specialists used mathematical procedures to optimize every aspect of fire support. The system included graphical firing tables that eliminated complex calculations, standard radio procedures that minimized communication time, and pre-surveyed battery positions accurate to within 1 meter. Meteorological sections provided hourly weather updates, while registration procedures accounted for barrel wear and ammunition variations. Time-on-target missions, a uniquely American capability at the time, demonstrated the pinnacle of this coordination. Multiple batteries would calculate backward from a desired impact time, with guns firing in sequence so all shells arrive simultaneously. This technique, impossible without precise communication and calculation, multiplied the psychological and physical impact of artillery fire. Japanese military leadership had received warnings about American artillery capabilities, but chose to ignore them. Japanese officers who had observed German Wehrmacht operations in Europe had reported on American fire support doctrine. Attachés in neutral countries had forwarded reports about American industrial production of artillery ammunition, millions of rounds per month. Colonel Hiromichi Yahara, operations officer for the Japanese 32nd Army on Okinawa, had studied American tactics and warned against Banzai charges. In pre-war planning sessions, he had argued that massed infantry attacks against modern firepower were suicidal. He was overruled by generals who believed spiritual power could overcome material disadvantage. The Banzai charges revealed fatal flaws in Japanese racial ideology. The belief that Americans were soft, materialistic, and incapable of sustained combat had been drummed into every Japanese soldier. They were told that Americans would break and run when faced with determined Japanese warriors exhibiting Yamato Damashi, the Japanese spirit. This racism cut both ways. American forces, initially terrified by Banzai charges in early battles, had by 1944 come to see them as evidence of Japanese irrationality. The charges reinforced American stereotypes that would influence strategic decisions, including the use of atomic weapons a year later. The American response to Banzai charges, overwhelming firepower rather than countercharges, reflected both tactical wisdom and cultural differences. Americans approached war as a problem to be solved through technology and organization. Japanese approached it as a test of spiritual strength. When these philosophies collided, technology always won. The Saipan Banzai charge represented the culmination of 2 years of American learning and adaptation. In early 1942, American forces had been caught off guard by Japanese tactics. By mid-1944, they had developed specific counter-doctrines that turned Japanese strengths into weaknesses. The evolution was documented in after-action reports. Guadalcanal, August 1942. Enemy night attacks achieved initial success through surprise and aggression. Recommend improved night defensive procedures. New Georgia, July 1943. Coordinated defensive fires broke up most enemy charges. Units with registered artillery support suffered minimal casualties. Tarawa, November 1943. Time on target missions proved highly effective against massed enemy troops. Recommend all FOs be trained in TOT procedures. Saipan, July 1944. Enemy Banzai attack completely destroyed by coordinated fires. No changes to doctrine recommended. American troops, who had initially been unnerved by screaming Japanese soldiers charging with bayonets, had learned to see these attacks as opportunities for destruction rather than threats. The decision to launch the Banzai charge on Saipan represented a catastrophic failure of Japanese military leadership. General Saito knew the attack would fail. His final messages indicated he saw it as a death ritual rather than a military operation with achievable objectives. Lieutenant General Holland Smith, commanding general of the 5th Amphibious Corps, analyzed the Japanese decision in his memoir. From a military standpoint, the Banzai charge was insane. The Japanese had strong defensive positions in northern Saipan's caves and ravines. They could have conducted a fighting withdrawal that would have cost us thousands of casualties and bought time for their homeland. Defences instead, they came out in the open where our firepower advantage was absolute. The Japanese military's inability to adapt to modern firepower stemmed from institutional and cultural factors that prioritized spiritual values over material reality. Officers who suggested defensive tactics or fighting withdrawals were labeled cowards. The result was tactical suicide on a massive scale. The American artillery system that destroyed the Saipan Banzai charge incorporated multiple technological innovations: radio communications, SCR 300 and SCR 610 FM, radios used by forward observers, provided clear, static-free communications, even in the electromagnetic chaos of battle, with a range of 3 to 5 miles, allowing observers to communicate with multiple FDCs simultaneously. Survey equipment. American artillery units used the latest survey equipment to establish battery positions with unprecedented accuracy, tied into a common grid system that allowed any observer to call for fire from any battery without complex calculations. Meteorological support. Each artillery regiment had a meteorological section that released weather balloons every 6 hours to measure wind speed and direction at various altitudes, crucial for long-range fire. Control instruments, the M7 graphical firing table and M10 plotting board, allowed FDCs to track multiple targets and friendly units simultaneously, solving complex firing problems in seconds rather than minutes. The destruction of the Saipan Banzai charge had strategic implications beyond the island itself. When word reached Tokyo that over 4,000 soldiers had died in a single charge, with minimal American casualties, it contributed to the fall of Prime Minister Hideki Tojo's government on July 18, 1944. The fall of Saipan brought American B-29 bombers within 1,250 miles of Tokyo. By November 1944, bombers were launching from Saipan's rebuilt airfields to strike the Japanese homeland. Admiral Osami Nagano would later state, "Our war was lost with the loss of Saipan." Despite the obvious futility demonstrated at Saipan, Japanese forces would launch more Banzai charges at Guam, Tinian, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, each ending in similar slaughter. The refusal to adapt would cost hundreds of thousands of lives. 9 months after Saipan, at Okinawa, in May 1945, the final evolution of American counter-Banzai tactics was displayed when the Japanese 32nd Army launched desperate charges on May 4th. The results were even more devastating than Saipan. The May 4th counteroffensive saw 5,000 Japanese soldiers attack American lines. Within 6 hours, 4,500 were dead. The Americans suffered 335 casualties. The kill ratio of nearly 15-1 demonstrated the absolute dominance of coordinated firepower over human wave attacks. By Okinawa, the Americans had added new elements, including improved white phosphorus shells for marking and psychological effect, better integration between Marine and Army artillery units, and continuous wave radar for tracking enemy movement at night. The efficiency of American artillery in destroying Banzai charges raised profound questions about the nature of modern warfare. The industrial slaughter of brave but misguided soldiers, while militarily necessary, troubled many American participants. Lieutenant Colonel Justice Chambers, whose battalion helped repel the charge, wrote in his personal papers, "There is no glory in what we did. We killed thousands of brave men who never had a chance. Yes, they were trying to kill us. Yes, it was necessary. But turning artillery into an assembly line of death is not war as our fathers knew it." The one-sided nature of the killing, made possible by American technological and organizational superiority, represented a new kind of warfare where courage alone meant nothing against coordinated firepower. The artillery techniques perfected against Japanese Banzai charges would influence military doctrine for decades. The fire direction center concept became standard in all modern armies. Time on target missions became routine training. The integration of forward observers with infantry units became doctrine. In Korea, 5 years later, American forces would use identical techniques to destroy Chinese human wave attacks. At the Battle of Chipyong-ni in 1951, artillery destroyed an entire Chinese division attempting a night assault. The Chinese, like the Japanese before them, learned that courage could not overcome coordinated firepower. The Vietnam War saw further refinement with computers for fire control calculations and helicopter-borne forward observers. The Gulf War in 1991 showcased GPS-guided artillery shells, but the basic concept, massed coordinated fires directed by forward observers, remained unchanged from Saipan. Decades after the war battle, American veterans of Saipan reflected on their experience. At the 50th anniversary commemoration in 1994, survivors gathered to remember that terrible morning. Arthur Robinson, a private with the 105th Infantry who survived the charge, recalled, "You have to understand we didn't want to kill them all, but they kept coming, wave after wave. Our artillery just cut them down. It was horrible, but what choice did we have?" The efficiency of the killing haunted many participants. They had won not through superior courage or skill, but through superior systems and firepower. It was victory without glory, success without satisfaction. The destruction of the Japanese Banzai charge on Saipan represented the collision between two military philosophies. The Japanese believed that spiritual strength and willingness to die could overcome any material disadvantage. The Americans believed that firepower, technology, and systematic organization would always defeat human wave attacks. The outcome was never in doubt once these philosophies collided. The American artillery system, with its forward observers, fire direction centers, time on target missions, and integrated communications, represented the application of industrial management techniques to warfare. The Japanese Banzai charge, rooted in samurai tradition and Shinto beliefs about honorable death, belonged to an earlier era. Against American artillery in 1944, it was mass suicide disguised as military tactics. The Saipan Banzai charge taught crucial lessons that only one side survived to apply. For the Americans, it validated their investment in artillery and fire control systems. The ability to mass fires from multiple batteries on a single target within seconds had proven decisive. For Japan, the lesson came too late. Some Japanese officers did learn and adapt. On Iwo Jima and later at Okinawa, generals like Tadamichi Kuribayashi and Mitsuru Ushijima avoided large-scale Banzai charges, instead fighting defensive battles that maximized American casualties. But these were exceptions. The institutional Japanese military never formally abandoned the Banzai charge. Captain Sakae Oba, who survived by avoiding the main charge and conducting guerrilla operations, would later reflect. We learned that night that courage without technology is meaningless in modern war. The Americans didn't defeat our spirit. They simply made it irrelevant. The final accounting of the Saipan Banzai charge reveals the stark mathematics of industrial warfare. Japanese casualties: 4,311 confirmed dead, wounded, unknown. Most died subsequently. Total participants approximately 4,000 to 4,300. Casualty rate near 100%. American casualties: 1st and 2nd Battalions, 105th Infantry, 406 killed, 512 wounded. 3rd Battalion, 10th Marines, 127 casualties. Total American casualties approximately 1,000. Casualty rate 40% for engaged units. Ammunition expended, estimated 12,000 plus artillery rounds. Thousands of mortar rounds. Naval gunfire, 615 major caliber shells documented. Cost effectiveness, approximately 3 artillery shells per Japanese casualty. These numbers tell a story of industrial efficiency applied to human destruction. The Americans had turned warfare into an equation where firepower multiplied by coordination equaled victory. The Saipan Banzai charge raises questions that remain relevant to modern warfare. Is there a place for human courage in industrialized combat? Can technology completely negate the human element in war? Does the efficiency of killing diminish the humanity of those who conduct it? Modern American military doctrine, shaped by experiences like Saipan, emphasizes overwhelming firepower and technological superiority. The goal is to win with minimal friendly casualties, even if that means massive enemy casualties. This approach has proven effective, but raises moral questions about the nature of warfare. The destruction of the Japanese Banzai charge on Saipan marked the definitive end of an era in warfare. Never again would military forces launch massed infantry charges against modern firepower expecting anything but annihilation. The romance of the charge, cavalry with sabres, infantry with bayonets, died on Tanapag Plain under American artillery fire. What emerged from the smoke and carnage was a new understanding of warfare as an industrial process. Victory would go not to the bravest, but to those with the best systems, fire control systems, communication systems, logistical systems. The human element remained important but subordinate to technological and organizational superiority. The Japanese soldiers who charged into American artillery on July 7, 1944, were among the last to believe that spiritual strength could overcome material disadvantage. Their deaths prove conclusively that in modern warfare, courage without technology is not enough. The American artillery system that destroyed them represented the future of warfare, coordinated, calculated, crushingly efficient. The 4,311 Japanese soldiers who died in the charge showed extraordinary courage. They deserved better than to be fed into the mechanical jaws of American artillery. But their commanders, blinded by ideology and tradition, sent them to die in a manner that achieved nothing except to demonstrate the obsolescence of their tactical doctrine. Their sacrifice stands as an eternal warning. In modern warfare, courage alone is not enough. Technology, organization, and firepower will always defeat human waves, no matter how brave those humans might be. The age of the glorious charge ended on Saipan, killed by American artillery that turned warfare into mathematics and mathematics into mass death. The Banzai charge was obliterated by American artillery coordination. More importantly, the very idea of the Banzai charge was obliterated, revealed as a romantic anachronism in an age of industrial warfare. In the Valley of Death on Saipan, courage met coordination, spirit met system, tradition met technology. Technology won.